All right, Chair Young, you're good to begin.
All right, thank you, Megan. Welcome back, everyone. We are now returning from recess for the afternoon of our Kentucky Board of Education retreat. I apologize for the extended recess. We weren't expecting that. We did discover at lunchtime that we had been exposed to someone who had tested positive for COVID. So following protocol, fortunately, we had all been following protocol this morning, but in an abundance of caution, we have all gone virtual for the remainder of today's session. To that point, just as a reminder to board meetings, since we are in primarily virtual settings now, this meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. Therefore, KBE members participating remotely must ensure their video is streaming and they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. KBE members, staff, KDE staff, and all visitors are required to wear a face covering, those who are still at the Department of Ed site. KBE members and speakers will be removing masks only when speaking and spaced apart from all other attendees. You will see some of our members together there at the department. And for any items that require action, a voice vote will be called. All those in favor will say aye, and those opposed will say no. And we would like you on camera for that session if we decide to take a vote later in the meeting around goal setting. However, in order to accommodate this change in plan for the afternoon, we have adjusted our afternoon schedule a bit, shortening some of the items which were less time sensitive, and we'll be able to schedule another meeting soon in order to address those. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Government Relations, Chuck Truesdell, who is going to share the slide deck that you will find in your portal and lead us in a conversation around our KBE legislative priorities. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. I may have jinxed us all because I'm looking at the remarks that I had prepared, and I started off by commenting about how excited I was to see all of you in person for the first time, instead of as a just a talking head on your computer screen. But here we are. We have 45 minutes, or had 45 minutes scheduled for this conversation, and that's really what it's going to be, is a conversation. I don't want to waste too much of your time talking at you. But what this is really going to do, we're going to try to facilitate a conversation among the board members about what you want your priorities to be on the legislative front going forward. To do that, I'm first going to quickly recap some of what happened in the 2021 legislative session and the implementation steps and action items that have followed on from that, just to bring you up to speed, and then we'll start focusing on what lies ahead. So next slide, please. So we're going to have two slides of what has happened in the past few months. The first bill I want to discuss is House Bill 563, particularly the open school enrollment portion of that bill. We knew when that bill passed that it was not done cooking, as we might say, that there would be tweaks that would have to be made in the upcoming legislative session. And so a group of school administrators were brought together by the Kentucky Association of School Administrators, mostly superintendents, but I and others from KDE sat in on those meetings for technical assistance, and have come up with a few recommendations to improve the bill and make it easier for school districts to implement. So we'll be hearing about those shortly, but as you might expect, most school districts wanted very broad guidance to allow them to do what they needed to do to set the attendance policies for their district. And to be clear, what this does is House Bill 563 will allow school districts, rather than using reciprocal agreements to admit students who don't live in their geographic area to attend, school districts will be allowed to open up their borders, so to speak, and districts will not be able to hold in students who live in their geographic borders. Those students will be able to attend any district that will accept them. And so the heart of the issue really gets to what parameters does each district want to set for what it may accept from students coming into its district. The second bill, if you could back up that slide, sorry, is House Bill 178, which is the Board of Education reorg bill. And,
did Lou say something?
Sorry, Tony. The House Bill 178 will have an action item tomorrow, actually, for the Board of Education. That bill requires, and I'll get into more detail tomorrow, that the board must promulgate an administrative regulation for the selection of the teacher and student members of the Board of Education. So we'll get into that tomorrow, but just have that on your radar. Senate Bill 128 was the supplemental school year program, as most of you are aware of. That actually set up a process by which districts could have sought an administrative regulation waiver from the State Board of Education to implement whatever program they needed to or desired to implement for their students. However, none of them found that necessary. So we saved you a board meeting there. You're welcome. And I know it has 128 districts opting in, but that is actually higher than what it was when I typed in that number. I guess I had 128 on the brain, but it's about 3/4 of all districts in the state are taking part in that program. Next slide, please. And also on the subject of teacher certification, there were two bills that may be of interest. The first bill is House Bill 163, which created two new types of teaching certificates. An emeritus certificate for those who have retired or are close to retirement, and that is a 10-year certificate. The exception certificate is for teachers who were at least rank 2 and had a minimum amount of time in the classroom before they left the classroom. This sort of streamlines the ability for them to get back in the classroom because, as we all know, it's sort of all hands on deck right now to get high quality teachers back into the classroom. EPSB has moved very swiftly on this. So at their last meeting, they passed emergency regs and normal regs to implement this going forward, and that's going through the LRC process right now. So they are moving very swiftly to get as many qualified teachers as we can back in the classroom. And finally, Senate Bill 270, which will allow Simmons University to create an educator prep program. Previously, state law mandated that you had to have regional accreditation, and the Senate Bill 270 will allow HBCUs with national accreditation, which would be Simmons, to go through that process. And they are currently working with our Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness to go through that process, figuring out exactly how they want to structure their program. And so we are very much looking forward to working with them and get more, particularly minority teachers, into the classroom. And they're highly focused on that. So that is what I have for the 2021 session. I don't know, Madam Chair, if you wanted to stop for any questions we might have there, or I can continue at your leisure.
No, let's go ahead. That's a good juncture. Any questions for Todd about the bills that he highlighted from this past session?
All right. If not, we'll continue. And again, this is going to, I'm not telling you what your priorities are. I would never presume to do that. But these are some of the issues that we are hearing chatter about in Frankfort. These are some of the issues that in talking to the various offices here at KDE, this is what they're hearing or what they're interested in. So I'm just going to go very high level over some of these issues, and hopefully that will spark some conversation among the board members.
And then at the October board meeting, we would need to take action on our priorities.
Well, you'll certainly need to take action on your budget priorities at the October meeting. The general priorities, the non-budget priorities, you could do at your December meeting, but there is no harm in doing it early so we can get to work on those.
Okay,
that'll be up to the board. So you heard earlier this morning from the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education, Dr. Will Hoyt and his team. That all started back again in April and May with the Commissioner's Listening Tour. And so that work is going to be used to help Dr. Glass develop his vision and his legislative priorities going forward. And so that is still a process that's happening. So I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail there, but I just will say that a lot of the issues that I have discussed with him, he has said, ooh, that came up in the coalition discussions, or that came up on the listening tour. And so if you see something that you think should be on this list that I'm not bringing up, it may indeed be folded into sort of a broader, comprehensive agenda that Dr. Glass is working on, and I'm sure he'd be happy to discuss that. On a couple of more tangible, concrete items, you may remember that earlier this year, the General Assembly appropriated $140 million to fund full-day kindergarten, which in the SEEK formula traditionally has been funded at 1/2 day, or 50% for each student. And so that is wonderful. That was incredible, but it was a one-time deal. It only is implemented for the 21-22 school year. I am happy to say that as a result, every school district in the state will be offering full-day kindergarten for this upcoming school year, which is a first in state history. And I'm not sure that would have happened without the General Assembly funding it. So that is incredible news. The trick is going to be that we need that to continue. And that may be me leaning too far out over my skis. I'll let you all discuss that. But I haven't heard anybody yet who has said, no, we don't need to fund full-day kindergarten, or that is a bad thing. So that's one thing to be aware of, and I'm sure that Robin and Karen, when they discuss ABRs, will discuss that as well. The other issue, which is not really early childhood, even though I put it under that bullet point, is early literacy, which to most of our minds is getting kids reading on grade level, at least by grade 3. By the time they get out of the 3rd grade. Now, there is general consensus that that's a good thing. We want that to happen. The consensus breaks down when we start discussing how do we make that happen? What programs do we need in place to make that happen? There has not been any pre-filed legislation on this yet, but I do anticipate that there will be what I call repeat legislation. Last year, there were 2 companion bills, House Bill 270 and Senate Bill 115, that would have repurposed funds for the Read to Achieve program to the Read to Succeed program. Read to Achieve is more grant-based. It's a competitive grant program that allows particular schools to hire teachers who are focused very narrowly on student literacy at those early grades. The Read to Succeed program is more broadly focused on coaching, professional learning to somewhat broaden the pool of teachers who are highly qualified to boost student literacy. And so that is something that I will expect to see again. Senate Bill 115 did pass the Senate last year, but it had some significant changes from its original form on the Senate floor, and so it did not go any further once it got to the House. And that was simply because, as some of you may well know, Read to Achieve has some significant support, and there was some concern that the successful elements of that program would go away. And so I think that is an issue that is ripe for conversation. Career and technical education. I was thinking I might not have to talk too much about this issue because David Horstman was going to tell you all about the brilliant work that they are doing there, but that has been delayed to a later time. So I will simply say that David and his staff, and I've been working with them to work with legislators to develop a better understanding of career and technical education, its governance structure, its funding structure, and perhaps most importantly, the benefits of career and technical education for all students, including those who already plan on attending a 4-year college and beyond for their education. Kentucky is known nationwide for its incredible CTE offerings, but that's really a testament to our incredible teachers and students, not necessarily to the governance or finance structure that's currently in place. And so we need to focus on ways, monetarily and otherwise, to encourage districts and administrators to provide pathways that open up rewarding careers for our students and boost our economy, regardless of where you happen to live in the state. We want to make sure that those offerings are available to all students, and that may not necessarily be the case for all students right now. On the school facilities side of things, KDE right now has a task force, an internal task force, where we're working with local district administrators to discuss ways to streamline the facilities process, the construction process, and all of that. Legislation has been pre-filed, budget or bill request 226, that mirrors legislation from last year, House Bill 279, that KDE worked on. This would allow local governments, where appropriate, and with the approval of the State Housing Building and Constructions Department, to conduct plan reviews and inspections. And that would also relieve some burdens on our, what I would say, highly overworked facilities branch here at KDE, so they can focus on that approval process and get rid of some of the things that may not be as productive for their time. The last issue on this slide is teacher recruitment. And I know you talked about this earlier with Kate, and I know the Go Teach KY presentation has also been delayed from earlier this afternoon. But one thing that has sort of fallen below the radar maybe is the lack of substitutes, which obviously, for those of you who have worked in a school district, you know what a planning nightmare that can be if you don't have enough substitutes. Currently, state law requires rank 5 teachers to have at least 64 hours of college credits, and that's a large pool from which we pull our substitutes. So there's some concern that college credit threshold may need to be lowered, or have some alternatives to get substitute candidates. For instance, allowing maybe emergency certification for those who complete, say, an EPSB approved prep course, something along those lines. And so that's more of an issue of while we're focused on recruiting and retaining teachers, let's not forget that substitutes are a part of that teaching core. Next slide. And these are two things that I probably don't need to speak a lot about, because I don't know that I could add much of anything of value to what Dr. Woods Tucker mentioned this morning. But you're all aware of some of the controversies that are going on in the broader public sphere and in social media these days. And I'm in constant communication with legislators on those issues. And I constantly remind them about our efforts to make sure that all students feel welcomed in the classroom, all students see a vision of success for themselves in all of the content that they are taught, and no students are excluded. And that every student sees their school as a place that they're proud of, a place that they want to be each day. And that extends not just to students, but also our teachers, administrators, and our staff. They all need to see themselves reflected in their daily experiences in their schools. And finally, I will not step on Robin's toes and Karen's toes on the biennial budget, but I will note that this upcoming year is a budget session. And so just as a gentle reminder that as we discuss your priorities going forward, that a lot of them may be great ideas, but they're only great ideas that can't be implemented without the funding to do so in a lot of cases. So I'm always blunt, and I know Dr. Glass has been blunt with legislators when they're talking about their legislation. We're very open and honest and say, that's great and all, but if you don't fund it, we're not going to do it. We can't do it. We do not have the spare resources for that sort of thing. So I just want to caution you, when you're prioritizing your goals, you need to pair those with funding requests to accomplish those same goals as necessary. I have one more slide after this, but I'll pause and wait before we get into the board member advocacy side of things to let the members sort of discuss what are your priorities, what do you think of what's happening in the realm of education legislatively right now, and what can we do to help you?
All right, thank you, Chuck. Board members, now that we are in a dispersed setting, feel free to unmute, and or if you want to try some hands, I see Dr. Poe. Thank you, that's very helpful. I don't always see all the hands, but I will try to monitor that with Meredith's help, and we'll have that conversation that Chuck invited us to. So Randy, please.
Yeah, Chuck, on the thing on the substitute, several years ago, I don't know if it was administrative regulation or whatever, that allowed us as school districts to have emergency certified subs that waived that 66 hours as long as we had a training program for them and we used all available certified subs beforehand. So just as something to look back on, that was a very successful program. And then when the economy turned around, it was something that we weren't allowed to utilize. We had to re-up with KDE each particular year, but that would be something in absence of legislation if to look back at if we still had those powers to do that. That's
an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
And I also see that we have a hand raised in the commissioner's conference room. So Sharon Alvis Soliana.
So my question concerns the early literacy proposals that we might see and the competition between two kind of brand name methodology, so to speak. And Chuck, I want to kind of make this in a broader context. How is it that the legislature can mandate certain aspects of actual classroom practice when we're supposed to be a local control state, meaning local boards, and even to the extent that the site-based management councils are involved in curriculum in some cases, not that that's a great idea either, but I'm just wondering, okay, I'm looking for consistency and some principle around which the legislature feels it must act on content and methodology. It's almost like saying to a doctor, you have to prescribe penicillin if somebody shows up with an infection, regardless of whether that infection is responsive to penicillin.
Well, I don't think I can speak for legislators because Lord knows I don't always understand what they're thinking at all times. I do know that, as we're all aware, those elementary reading scores on our tests have not improved as much as we might have hoped. And that is the case even for some of those schools where they do have Read to Achieve programs. And we all know, I think, well, you all have more education background than I do, obviously, but a lot of this comes down to the teacher in the classroom. And so I think from the conversations that I've had is that what they really want to be able to do is scale up the positive attributes of Read to Achieve. And so I think this is really more about giving those K-3 teachers across the board, not just what we would call the Read to Achieve teachers, but the broad cohort of K-3 teachers who are involved in literacy efforts, the tools they need and the coaching and professional development they need to understand, say, the science of reading. And that goes back to, if you look at the bills that were filed last year, also include required training when they are in their educator prep program to understand the science of reading, to better prepare all of them for the classroom. I think that is the overarching goal of what Senate Bill 115 was aimed at, is more along the lines of scalability. Not that there's necessarily anything that Read to Achieve teachers or the program is doing wrong. I think it's more along the lines of, I think they see more bang for the buck in this different program.
And Jason, before I recognize Claire's question, were you going to weigh in on the response to Sharon's question as well?
I'd hope to, yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. The local control element in the state of Kentucky is a legislatively created policy. So the legislature, through its action, can violate the notion of local control if it wants to. It created that through CARA and the Site-Based Decision-Making Council. So what a past legislature has given, the future legislature can taketh away. I would advise that they should be cautious in doing that because the state's now got decades of a policy orientation that assumes local control of curricular decisions. And so once we start reversing that, we've got decades of statutes and regulations that potentially are impacted. The other way that they could go about driving this, rather than circumventing the local decision-making and mandating a curriculum or approach, is to tie it to funding. To say, if you want these dollars, you have to do it this way. And that may be what we end up seeing with this program.
And that was going to be my response to Sharon, that these are competitive state grant funds with the fiscal note attached. So, and that's generally been the approach. Sorry, Chuck, and then to Ms. Batt.
No, I was just going to say there was one concern that I know we had expressed with the bills last year as they were filed, which gave somewhat more broad control to the school board to select sort of those interventional curricular programs. And so we think we got a good reception there because I know that the Kentucky Association of School Councils had also expressed some frustration on that front. And so I think we'll see some changes on that front to give, if not SBDNs more control, at least give them more voice in that decision at the district level if it's made at the district level.
Thank you. And Claire.
Yes, I really wanted to come back to the early literacy discussion is near and dear to my heart because I've spent so many years working as a literacy coach and having a lot of specialized training in that area. But to that end, I also feel the need to push for expanding access to preschool. While I know numbers have been declining in preschool enrollment, I think we really need to be investigating the reasons for that. Some of which I know in talking with some parents tend to be related to the inaccessibility of preschools in their location and the transportation requirements of meeting the bus in half-day preschool, which cuts out so many of our parents who are lower socioeconomic status and cannot really address those transportation requirements the way they need to. But it also really relates to the literacy skills that we see coming of children coming into school, the lack of vocabulary and complex sentence structure development. So I think this is an area that we cannot overlook in pushing for funding. And even if we don't get it, I think we have to always be pushing it because it's a foundational piece of the educational system that I think has long been neglected in our country.
All right, thanks.
That's my spiel.
No, that's very helpful. And that provides a nexus for us for just a few minutes when we get to Robin and the additional budget requests conversation too. I think it highlights for us, Claire, how these two conversations must dovetail. Looking back at the slides that Chuck shared, any other comments or questions for Chuck, or any thoughts that you may want to bring to the table about potential legislative priorities for the board moving forward into the fall? I'll share one comment, Chuck. I heard Randy follow up about a way that we used to handle subs in the past. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting that you have it here with teacher recruitment and substitutes. I like that notion. And I know that there has been some latitude, regulatory latitude, I believe, provided by the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness around teacher apprentice models for pre-service teachers. Which might also be a very creative way to think about addressing the substitute teacher shortage as well. Personally, and this is more folksy than it is educator preppy of me, but the idea that if you jump in as a substitute and begin practicing in a safe, structured way your craft with real kids, it's very impactful for a young pre-service educator as well.
I'm writing that down.
Lou and Randy said to do this, if only.
Well, if the two of you agree on something, then that is definitely worth following up on.
Hey. Jason, I might.
We always agree. Lou always agrees.
Who is that man, and what have you done with Randy Poe?
Yeah.
Jason, I wondered if there are some prescient legislative priority comments that you would want to jump in and share while we have Chuck's slides available.
I think the we are working toward seeing what emerges from the coalition work, the summit that we have announced for this fall, and that may drive some legislative priorities for us for the spring, but it really should be a multi-year legislative agenda that emerges from that. So I think that work is underway. What you have here are the things that we've been able to identify our priorities for right now, but we'll have to keep this engagement work going and listening to stakeholders around the state to, I think, define what the future vision is and then work toward that.
Thank you. A good reminder of our conversation this morning. I would take us all the way back to our building the wall, building the bridge conversation this morning too. I was listening carefully for some of those emergent priorities, and I in fact heard those around professional learning and around adequacy of funding, of course, around early childhood access and opportunity. So I think a lot of those ideas came out this morning as well. Any other questions or comments about the legislative priorities as they currently stand? All right, Chuck, thank you. You beat the clock.
Well, I've got one slide left, so.
All right, I'll let you do that one. And will you be hanging around for the ABR conversation too? Because again, I see those two weaving pretty tightly together today.
Oh, yes.
All right.
I will certainly be second round for that. I just wanted to include just one last mention that, this is a democracy, and you are always, in fact, encouraged to contact your elected officials and let them know how you feel. Besides, you all are education experts, and so you have more than most to contribute to that conversation. I just wanted to give you a word of caution. When you do that, remember that the board takes action and asserts its priorities. When you are speaking to a legislator or to any other elected official, you are representing yourself, not the board. And you all have been great about doing that. Just a word of caution that in people's minds, you can never remove yourself from the board. I mean, imagine if I try to tell you, now this is KDE's position, but Chuck, just speaking myself, I'm totally opposed to that. That's not the way I see it. That would not work. And so just always be cognizant that you are at all times, as much as you may say, I'm just speaking for myself, you are always representing the Kentucky Board of Education in some capacity. And because it really is an honor and a privilege to have you on our board. That is not just when you're speaking in public to anybody, but also on social media. So, which is why I'm always trying to be cautious when I'm out there in public. The other thing I want to remind you of is if you do have contact with legislators or other government officials, please let me know what's going on. You may be hearing things and have contacts that I do not, that may help us do a better job for the department and for the board. And it's always helpful for us to know, what our active board members are doing. And when you do that, please also loop in Meredith Brewer, because she always likes to keep tabs on what our board is doing, and it helps her do her job better as well. Again, that is not meant to interfere in anything you are doing, and I encourage you to be active citizens. Just always remember that you are a member of the board and representing the board at all times.
Point well taken and well received, Chuck. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Chuck around advocacy too before we move into additional budget requests? I do encourage you to take Chuck up on the offer to run it by him. I always run everything by Todd. Meredith has great instincts on that as well. So don't let yourself be unnecessarily gagged if there's something that you want to speak out about, but definitely avail yourself of that wise counsel. All right, excellent, thank you. And at this point, we have with us Associate Commissioner Robin Kinney and Division Director Karen Worth. They did a great job preparing us for the fact that this conversation was coming. I've had a chance to look over the spreadsheet and the slide deck. I'm sure you guys have too. The numbers are big numbers, mind-boggling numbers, but dollars that will be well spent depending on how all things unfold throughout this fall and into the next session. So Robin, I think we're ready. I think we all know ABRs as an acronym now, thanks to you and Karen. If you would jump right in, please.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. First, let me do just a little bit of a sound check. Karen and I are in a conference room on the 4th floor. Just want to make sure that you can hear me.
It's a little bit tinny, Robin. If you could move the mic maybe closer to you, and then I know you guys want to remain socially distanced, but then maybe share it back and forth somehow. Let's try it just a little closer.
Todd saying not well at all. Is that better?
I was trying to be nice, Todd. It was a little tinny.
Okay, I'm going to pull it up this way just a bit.
So wrong.
Trying to be on camera a little bit.
Oh, no, that's worse. Nope, we lost you almost completely.
Oh, no. We're going to try to unplug and just use off of the laptop here real quickly.
Oh, that sounds good where you are right now, Robin, if that works.
Oh, that sounds better?
It does.
Okay. Okay, so you may not see me on the screen as well. So I might just be a talking head.
Actually, you're talking hands, if that helps at all.
Hands. Yeah. I don't think we want to do like a puppet or anything like that. Okay. So we'll do our best here. I think it's more important that you hear me instead of see me. Okay. So our goal with you all today is to receive your input and feedback as we continue to talk about ABRs. As Chair Young said, those are additional budget requests. Remember, this will be a recommendation by the Department of Education to the Office of the State Budget Director and to the Governor's Office for inclusion in the executive branch budget. And as a reminder, we've been on this budget journey of building our budget for a little while now. The ABRs are in addition to our base funding request, and we've already talked about that before, so this is above and beyond. So when we talk about ABRs, just as a reminder, we have different types, and you all don't need to get caught up too much in these types, but these are things that you can ask for as an ABR. So we have growth. So that's when we're basically short in our funding. So we're talking about supporting our current scope of work beyond our baseline and defined calculations, but we're just short. So we need to kind of get it up to what the current scope is requiring of us. We also have new or expanded. And new or expanded, if we can go to the next line, please. New or expanded is work beyond our current scope that wasn't in our last budget. So this is something brand new, a great idea that we've come up with, wasn't included in the last. And then the last type of ABR is a fund source replacement request. And we'll actually hear a little bit about that specifically in our discussion today because we have some federal funds that are available to us right now through the federal government that we know by the end of the next budget cycle we will lose. So we already know that in advance that it's going to go away. So we can ask for an ABR to replace or sustain those levels of services due to a loss or reduction of federal restricted funds. So that's our three types of ABRs. So that can help us frame the types of things that we're talking about. So next slide, please. As Chair Young said, we do have a spreadsheet, and it is long, and there are big numbers. Let me start by sharing with you how we came up with what I would call the first cut. So this is our first cut based on information that we've been gathering. And it was really nice to hear Chuck kind of talk immediately before us. And also, as we listened into your discussion this morning and your team building exercise, We heard lots of information about things that you are seeing as important to the work of this board and for the Commonwealth of Kentucky for our students. So we listened, Karen and I listened quite closely at all your board meetings. We listened to not only the things that affect my office directly, but we listened to all of your conversations. We kind of eavesdrop a little bit so that we can hear what you're talking about and what is important. We listened to the strategic planning sessions, and of course, we listened to Chuck's legislative discussions. Second, as we build this first cut, we request each of our offices in KDE to send forth their good proposals. These are the people that are closest to our work, and they understand and appreciate the legislative requirements that are already in place, the statutory requirements, and they also weigh in heavily on where our future investments can make the best impact for students and learning. We've also, this time around, we've listened into the discussions and themes coming from the Commissioner's virtual tours that's already been talked about. So we've gained information from that. And we've also listened to the Education Coalition. So the other two really valuable kind of feedback loops for us. And then finally, this time, probably more than any other, we have access and opportunities that are available to us from funds from ESSER. And of course, those are the funds that are coming to help us as we prevent, prepare, and respond to the coronavirus. But it is an opportunity for initial investments, startups, and some of these funds can be used in that manner too. So as we've built this spreadsheet for you, I would encourage us to think most closely and focus our discussion today on sort of this purpose column, because I will share with you right now the numbers and dollar amounts in the other columns will change. They will continue to change from now until October when we bring you back a final ADR request. We want today to really try to focus in and get refined the purpose column. Let's talk about the spreadsheet itself now.
And board members, there is a hard copy in your white retreat folder.
Thank you, Chair Young. So the spreadsheet itself, as I've said, this is a draft. So this is not in final format by any stretch of the imagination. It will continue to be refined through October when we'll come back to you for your final kind of head nod. It is a long list, and I appreciate hearing so much clear back saying, you know, we need to keep talking about a certain item to be successful. And the reason that our ABR list is typically long is because sometimes you do have to kind of ring the bell over multiple times for people to really understand the momentum and the motivation behind it. So budget professionals might differ on the best way to put together their ABRs, but here at the Kentucky Department of Education, we have historically included all that we think we need. So this is not trying to fit into how much money we think there is out there. This is what we need. We're saying these are all important projects and we need it. That does not necessarily mean that they will be included or they will be appropriated, but there is importance into building that historical record of what is needed. So I appreciate very much Claire kind of bringing that to us as well.
Robin, I think this would be a good time for me to ask a question that I meant to actually email you. Just check my own understanding. These are for our agency. I often get questions about funding for Family Resource Youth Service Centers, for example. How does that happen under the leadership of another cabinet? Is it a similar process?
So actually the funding or partial funding, not all the funding, but we receive funding appropriated from the General Assembly for Friskies. It comes through the Department of Education's funding, And then we provide that directly to the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, and they actually manage and distribute those funds.
Okay, I thought it was the other way around. Thank you.
And they also actually receive their own independent funds on top of that. So they're receiving funds from two different locations, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
So this is for the Department of Education's budget. If there is a desire to pursue increases for Friskies, we would work with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. And in fact, sometimes legislators will ask us, why does it come to KDE first and not to them, and we get the reverse. So that is probably, that is an unusual situation, I would say, of where we basically pass through funds to another agency and they manage that.
Thank you. Very helpful.
And on this list, they are not in any priority order right now. So as Chuck said earlier, it's not the role of the department to prioritize these requests. What we're trying to do right now is making sure we have the right requests, and then we will ask you as a board to prioritize those requests, and we'll talk about that. This is sort of going to be your homework for tomorrow.
I think Randy has a question at this point, Robin.
I see Randy's hand.
Just on the additional budget request, because I was looking at, as you were talking before, on the local area vocational centers and times the 13. Is that the current ones, or are we requesting, as we did last year, for additional that are on the list that have not been funded as we still speak, that are drying up on the vines out there?
Yes, that's a good question. We are requesting for those additional ones, not just for what we are currently managing. It is for those additional that are not receiving those funds.
Okay, because I didn't know how many were receiving funds at that 450, because I knew that there was at least 8 or 9, but then the 5. So as long as we keep advocating for them, because it's just that, we made that promise as a board, and then it was cut out, several years ago, not from our standpoint of the board, but the funding never increased. So that's a positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so, Robin, just for procedurally, do you want to handle questions that way? Are you planning to go item by item? How would we best manage this conversation?
We have not planned on going item by item. I think we'll run out of time if we do that. But I would invite you to either ask questions, of course, of what you're looking at. But most importantly, as you look through the list, is there things that we have left off? Because it's really important that we get everything on that the board feels that we should scope out and we should cost out for you before October. And so if you can take a critical eye and look and see if there's anything that we have left out or left off.
All right, thank you. So board members, we'll let Robin and Karen keep talking to us, but if you would please just follow Randy's lead there and raise your hand. If you don't mind, I think I'll start knowing that we've had lots of conversations about the coalition work and expecting that even as early as October, some priorities that perhaps will have budget implications will arise. What do we do about what we don't know in August in terms of this process?
So we can add information in October. We can certainly do that at that time. My understanding is the coalition work, their report will be coming out soon. I will say soon because I don't know exactly the date of that. We are in tune with Karen Dodd and keeping up with when that happens. So if that report comes out, we will go ahead for your October meeting and add anything that we see from that. And then you as a board can also direct us to add additional information once you hear that information in October.
So even if it's captured as a TBD item at the end,
Yeah.
like the 1%, for example?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Chair Young, to your point, there are a couple of TBDs on this. We have a placeholder for that social, emotional learning and mental health item. We heard a little bit more from your discussion this morning, but we're really trying to zone in with the work of our program office. And what does that look like? When we say that, what are the financial resources that are needed to support? What does that look like from a delivery mechanism? How can we assist our schools in that area? Schools do have access to ESSER funds, but again, that's going to run out in 2024. So we put that on there as a placeholder as we continue to think about that one. What is the best way to request money, and then how are we going to use it?
Excellent. Thank you. A couple of comments from me. I definitely want to continue to wave the flag for full day kindergarten. That $140 million is going to make a long term difference for the kids in that kindergarten class, indeed. And it provides so much flexibility on the side of the school district to plug that hole that they would otherwise be spending out of their general funds. I also heard a lot of conversation today around all things professional learning. The equity initiative was brought up this morning as well. And then I have two questions. I'd like to hear a little bit more, Robin, from what you know, or if Byron is on the call, about a revised and redesigned KTIP program. And then my other question was about, I did receive a letter from the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards about that National Board stipend that has been funded, unfunded, funded, unfunded in Kentucky for several years.
We do have members from each of the offices on the call. I'll see if Byron is on the call and would like to talk about KTIP.
Robin, was a funding of KTIP one of the things that came in from the Office of Educator Licensure and Evaluation for ARP or ESSER funding? I can't recall.
No,
I don't think so.
there were STEP and PEEP, two other ones.
Yeah, there were two other ones, STEP and PEEP.
That were funded out of ARP ESSER.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the Grow Your Own that we're doing with the through the cabinet.
Okay, but nothing as comprehensive as what KTIP would have provided.
Right, that's correct.
So it looks like Byron's not on to answer that question. Really, he wasn't on board when we were going through much of this budget development process, so I'm not sure that he would be able to shed much light on it. But Madam Chair, are you setting forth for discussion a priority in including the restoration of KTIP funding as a budget request?
My observation was kind of twofold. One, I didn't realize that that it was that the redesign was a consideration. I applaud that completely, and I do find that teacher induction is severely lacking right now. I would couple that with the professional learning comments I made earlier about PD, National Board certification, et cetera. So all of those teacher professionalization notions, I think, are helpful. And again, I think they align with the conversations that we've been having, but I don't know much about what the thinking is around Revive KTIP. I hate to put Meredith on the spot, but she was interim associate commissioner there for a while. Meredith, is that something you could shed some light on? If
sure,
not,
and Byron is in the call as well. So there was a request to use a portion of ARP ESSER funds for a new teacher experience. That is quite different than KTIP, but they did want to sort of pilot some sort of an evolution of that internship program. So they are planning to use those funds to do some exploratory work. But Byron could probably speak to that more. Vita's team, actually, in educator recruitment and development, will be taking point on that project.
Correct. I don't disagree. Sorry, I was catching the tail end of that. Now, I'm sorry, who is on the call?
This is where just the board retreat is in
Okay.
a virtual environment right now.
Got you. Absolutely. Well, we're trying to generate support for, dare I say, KTEP, because sometimes that carries, just initial thoughts with it from the past, but certainly the coaching context being the primary point of conversation in rejuvenating that, and the importance and the vacuum that is there since KTEP has gone away. So complete agreement on getting the opportunities out there for this to become a reality.
Thank you. And welcome, Byron. We haven't even had a chance to meet you yet, hopefully very soon and in person. I would just put a bug in the ear of the team as you think about this. I was glad to hear Meredith say that Vita's team will be working on this too. This is another one of those obvious nexuses between the work of our equity, grow your own, recruit and retain a diverse teacher workforce. And I don't want us to miss the chance to let kind of a siloed idea of the old internship program miss out on the opportunity to be part of our equity work and, maybe doing double stretch duty. But it sounds like with Vita there, you have a swing person in that work as well.
Yes, that's correct. And certainly, as you stated, that is in unison with the conversation here in terms of honoring kind of what it initially was. But of course, I think learning a lot about what was truly important about that, and that being the coaching element, the mentorship that provides the greatest long-term impact for any teacher, much less a new to profession teacher.
Thank you. Board members, other questions or comments? Randy, is your hand back up? Oh, no, just not down yet.
No, sorry, just not down.
Sorry, call you out there. I'm the worst at finding hands. Feel free to just unmute and jump in, team, if that's easier.
Chair Young, if I may also, I invite you to think about whether we have some things appropriately scoped for you. An example that I would give is in the earlier discussions today when you were talking about early childhood and preschool. Right now, we've got it scoped to restore former preschool funding levels. But I also listened this morning about discussions about a more universal preschool option. So that's another thing that I would call your attention to really think about how you would like to guide us on that as well. Are we appropriately scoping for sort of the direction and funding that you need? So that would be one example is preschool. Additionally, professional development is one that I've heard you all chatting about. And again, we were looking toward restoring professional development to former levels, but maybe that's not the thought. And so we want to make sure that we are scoping these and costing these out appropriately based upon your expectations and where you see us heading.
Oh, thank you, Robin. I wonder the same thing. I penciled a note to Jason this morning. As I recall back from the 2008 era, we all long for having a state PD budget available, but my recollection was that was about $13.53 per teacher. Literally, I'm not joking. That, as I recall, was the amount. So it's not like those were the bountiful good old days, but $13.53 per teacher is a whole lot better than $0 per teacher. So I think finding the right balance. For instance, if you look at the back page, we have a big number, $867 million. What is there any way to project, dust off your crystal ball, but any way to project what a realistic what the reality could be in terms of additional funding. And I know that we want $867 million on the table for the conversation. We don't want to leave any stones unturned, but typically what might we expect to get, or maybe atypically because of ARPS or?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that come into play with that discussion. Just like Chuck indicated earlier, it is really hard to predict what the legislature will do, either individual members or collectively, when it comes to funding. I will say in many biennial budget requests, we have been in very dire straits when it comes to state level funding. I am a little more optimistic because we've heard the last fiscal year that the Commonwealth of Kentucky ended with a nice surplus.
Right.
Now we're going to have all kinds of people competing for that money. You know, once there's a surplus, then people are like, raise your hand, everybody wants it. There's also, of course, times when they're looking to bolster the rainy day fund again. So not only agencies competing, but also restoring and bolstering that kind of money that's put aside for a rainy day. So I feel a little more optimistic about the ability to maybe receive some additional budget request funding. I think some of that goes in our messaging. You know, we do have ESSER money, but it can't be used for everything. I mean, it has to be used according to the requirements of the federal legislation. So as we work through our budget requests, you know, we will, between now and October, continue to refine and utilize ESSER funds where it is appropriate and permissible to do so. And so you might see some of these dollars on here actually with the big asterisk that says we're going to use ESSER money for it.
Right.
But it's important for us to understand it's still a need at this point. And then for the second year, we may come back and say, but the second year we're going to need money from the General Assembly.
Excellent.
It's very difficult to predict.
Yeah, so this is our opportunity to weigh in on that too, as Jason and his team consider the federal allocations as well.
Exactly.
What other questions might you have or observations about the list as it currently exists?
Chair Young, it's
Yes.
Patrice McCrary.
Please.
I have a question about the universal preschool. I still would love to see that in there, and I would love to see us push for the backing for it. But would it be in our best interest to put our support fully behind the full day kindergarten request now and continue to push for universal preschool following that?
I think you're so wise, Patrice. And that has always been the conundrum, right? To advocate for and attain universal preschool and then find kids falling into a hole with a half-day kindergarten experience and then to pull themselves up and to move forward. Speaking as a recovering superintendent, I will tell you that generally the notion of the fully funding full-day kindergarten gives districts that are ready to move forward more with universal preschool the flexibility and opportunity to do that as well. Knowing that with universal preschool in some places, especially growing districts, that brings its own level of infrastructure challenge. Having said that, I also hear your heart loud and clear. We're having to sacrifice between our 5-year-olds and our 3- and 4-year-olds when we put these things down on paper, right? Robin, you might have a much wiser and more financial take on that response too.
I think it's clearly within the discretion of the board to decide how to advocate for that. And you can do that based upon your priority setting. So you may rank full day kindergarten higher than preschool, but leave preschool on the list with a goal and a number toward universal preschool to start telling that story of that's the direction the board intends us to head.
I would love to see the number at a very minimum.
So based upon your question, Chair Young, about what that looks like, $370 million for universal preschool. We had the Office of Special Education and Early Learning kind of cost that out for us. So it will be at a cost of, an estimated cost of $370 million.
Thank you. So you can see that just sheds light on what Patrice saw as a bit of a Solomon's dilemma for us in the conversation with a number. And that would be over a biennium, Robin?
No, that's annually.
Oh, yikes. Okay. Well, there you go. Patrice, any more questions?
So the other thing, you know, as you're talking about full day kindergarten and the funding that goes along with it, you know, districts have been paying that. You know, the half has been paid by SEEK. That gives them the other half. And of course, that will come to them. And so that's going to free up some funds that they've been expending that they could utilize toward preschool.
Yes.
So that does help. Of course, districts also have to think about what that means in terms of just their facilities and planning and staffing and all that. But it does free up money. So anytime that we are obtaining additional funds and districts are already expending their own funds, then that frees up that financial opportunity for something else.
I would want to call everyone's attention to under the OSEAL category, the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, you will see some other related funding proposals in support of diverse learners, early childhood, and state-funded preschool, not universal preschool, but restoring funding to, would that be the 2008 levels, or does that go back based on these waning preschool figures, Robin? The state-funded preschool line.
2018, we actually were allocated or appropriated the $90 million.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
All right.
Chair Young, if I can also just to give the board members a little bit of information on the two last categories on the back page.
Yes.
One is entitled Employment of Leadership Personnel, House Bill 192. The other is a 1% increment. And so I call that to your attention with a little bit of further explanation. We're still working on a cost for that. But in House Bill 192, which is the last budget bill, and for many, many years, back to at least 2000 that I'm aware of, there's been some language in the Kentucky Department of Education's budget that allows the Kentucky Board of Education to have the sole authority to determine the employees of the Department of Education who are exempt from the classified service and to set those employees' compensation comparable to the competitive market. It's language that's been in there for some time. It was utilized by prior boards, and then we went into a period of where we were just having budget cut after budget cut after budget cut. And it was very difficult to keep up with the competitive market. And we would like to bring back to you at the October meeting our thoughts on what the competitive market is bearing out there, comparisons to our local school districts. I know at one of the meetings we had a comment from a board member that there are people that would like to come and work at the Department of Education. Well, we sure would like to have them, but we really struggle on compensation. So I wanted to call that provision to your attention and let you know that we would like to develop something to bring to you in October where we've done a little bit of analysis, comparison to local school districts and certain positions here at the Department of Education.
Thank you so much. I didn't realize that's what that line meant, Robin, but I'm anxious to see that, and I appreciate that you're working on that. The depression of salaries that has occurred among the, do we call them merit?
these would be non-merit staff.
Okay, so among the non-merit personnel at the department is something that I think that we, in all sincerity, need to take a close look at and to address. So thank you. And the 1% increment?
And the 1% increment, we have been through our budget instructions from the Office of State Budget Director. We've been asked to prepare a 1% salary increase number for all staff in all executive branch agencies. So they've asked us to cost that out, and we don't know if we'll do it as an additional budget request or if we will do it as it'll come to us as a defined calculation. So the reason we're asked to do this, there is a statute under KRS Chapter 18A that deals with employee compensation in state government. And that statute requires a 5% annual increment. It is not withstood every single budget bill, just about. And, you know, state employees here have gone many, many years without increments or minor increments. So, but we have been asked this time to prepare a 1%, what that would look like from a cost perspective, and submit that as part of our budget request. So we will prepare that number and have that for you all to know what that number is.
All right, thank you. And then, Robin, in terms of process, we need to begin to make some decisions about ABRs in October. We have a list. We have some consideration. We have some items to be determined. For example, can you illustrate for us how boards have enacted this process to prioritize in the past, or is that something that Meredith and Jason and I just need to start hammering out?
Yeah, so in the past, you know, we listened carefully to your discussions. Our goal that we need to get to, quite frankly, is we're not going to ask you to put in priority order, ranking priority order 1 through 25, however many we come up with. What we will ask is for the board to pick out your top 3 to 5 priorities as a board. And what that allows us to do, number one, we have to put that on our submission itself. Quite frankly, the ones at the top are the ones that we are paying the most attention to, and anyone reviewing our budget request is paying the most attention to. When you get much past 6 down, you know, it's again, for historical perspective, it's good to have them on there, but it doesn't matter if it's number 6 or number 9 or number 12 or number 15. So we need to really focus on maybe the top 3 to 5 priorities of this board. And while I listen to you, I might have a perception of what that is, but it's really important that the board articulate that. And then once we do that, then we will submit the budget with your priorities. So that's kind of homework for tonight, because we do have an agenda item tomorrow for you all to think about your top 3 to 5 priorities as individual board members. And then we continue this discussion tomorrow. Now, once we get those set, if we have to adjust because we get additional items in October, we can certainly do that. So don't feel like you're locked in. But it's just starting to get that conversation kind of melding around where you are as a board for your top 3 to 5.
Got it. All right, board members, other questions about content or procedure? All right, Karen, Robin, thank you all so much. We appreciate the heavy lift up to this point, and thank you.
Thank you, Chair Young, and thank you for the discussion by the board members and the questions. Thank you.
You guys have some homework to think about tonight before we convene in our regular meeting tomorrow. So we'll see you again then, Robin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the next item on our agenda is around time to start thinking about our goal setting. And so Meredith has put together a slide for us to take a look at the 2020-21 goals that we talked about this time last year. And so I want to first just engage us in yet another conversation modeled by Chuck and then by Robin in terms of these goals. If we feel like we get to a place where we're able to reach consensus around a set of goals, then we do have a quorum and are able to take a motion, a second, and take action on those goals. If not, I can bring this back forward. It does appear that we will need to have a special call meeting to bring in the folks that we had to postpone today. So I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to talk about this in greater detail. But in the meantime, let's take a look at this list. I won't read them to you, but I will give you time. This is not in the portal. So I will give you some time now to refresh your memory on these and to look at these 5 bulleted goals here. Take a few minutes to do that, and then I'll reopen the conversation. All right. So let me just open this up for any thoughts or comments or perhaps even questions of any of the KDE team members who are on today's meeting about any of the different items that we established last year as big board goals. Feel free to just unmute for the conversation. If you feel better about hands, I'm trying to watch.
Okay, go.
Chair Young,
Yes, please, that Mr. Johnson, thank you.
those for us, please. Would you read those goals for us?
Oh, certainly, I'd be happy to. So the first goal on the list, I'm not sure we called them goal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but the first one out, this is advance policies that increase the qualities and competencies of a more diverse educator workforce, as measured by actions including resolutions, targeted communication with the EPSB, and regulation reviews on this topic. So maybe taking these in this order is actually a really good protocol for us, Alvis, in that I think we could ask ourselves, do we think we have accomplished that goal in its entirety? Or if not, is this still a priority goal for this board? Perhaps we could take them one at a time in that way. I, for one, would put in a strong thumbs up that this is still an appropriate and timely goal for us, yet one that is certainly still a work in progress.
Yeah, we can acknowledge the partnership with EPSB and the work that's underway, but there's no way we can say we're there yet.
Agreed. And with the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching and some of the other initiatives that we've been hearing about over the course of the retreat, and perhaps now that Associate Commissioner Darnell is on board, and because we have Dr. Woods Tucker, that if we can begin even thinking about fleshing these out to some evidence and measurements that align with these goals would be helpful as they grow up as well. The second one reads, rebuild/strengthen critical partnerships throughout Kentucky's education community, promoting the creation of a portrait of a graduate at key transition points as measured by documentation of partnerships and the portrait of a graduate included in the Kentucky Department of Education's future of Education document. So clearly we've heard with the Advancing Education Coalition work that this is underway. And I heard Jason say this morning, acknowledge the fact that there is on the website a set of competencies, graduation competencies that the coalition work has been doing, starting with Shelby County, Jefferson County, and others. Now I think they're up to 10 or 12 districts. But I would contend that while it exists and it is on the website, I think what we had envisioned, I'll never forget that Claire was the one actually who articulated this so well when Jean Wilhoit helped us with our budget priorities a year ago, April, to talk about what an operationalized grad profile would look like, Jason, with the key transition point measurements, what it looks like for learner profiles, performance assessment wrapped around those competencies, articulating the grad profile from end of primary to end of intermediate, end of middle, end of high, and transitioning on to the work ethic work that's happening at CPE, et cetera. So I, for one, think this is still a laudable goal and one that we, like Sharon said, we can absolutely show evidence that we are attaining, but have not said, yes, we are there.
This is Claire, and I really think this is one we need to continue working on. And I'm wondering if in the wording, we need to change it just slightly and take out the partnerships with Kentucky's education community and really make it a more broad-based partnership with, it really should be industry and business and, across the board in terms of parents and all stakeholders.
Yeah, I like that. Take a minute there to wordsmith that for me and restate it, Claire, but I'm with you. I see where you're going. So maybe even continue.
Just really taking out education throughout Kentucky's,
partnerships with all Kentucky stakeholders.
Right. It's really not limited to.
Excellent. And I'm fine with both of the first bullets to if we use some kind of verbiage that talks about that these are in fact in progress and continuing. Patrice.
I love that, Claire, and I think it is totally in keeping with the conversation we had this morning about the findings through the visits, the stories that we heard this morning.
Excellent. I'll call for consensus on these in a minute, but let's keep walking through these. The third one.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Before we leave that one, can you provide clarity for me on what it is, given the fact that we had this portrait of a graduate work that was underway and completed in 2019, and then we have this language here about the portrait of a graduate again. What is it? I mean, I understand the importance of building and establishing these partnerships, but tell me about what specifically you mean as that crosses over with the portrait of a graduate work. Are you saying you'd like us to restart that again or redo it, or what would you like us to do with that?
I might almost word it this way, and then let me explain why. It's a $5 verb. We can find a better one, but operationalize Kentucky's portrait of a graduate with support from all Kentucky stakeholders to clarify key transition points as measured by partnerships, portrait of a graduate, all of the future of education documents. I think it opens the door to some real implementation. So I'm wondering even if maybe we're not even talking about the same thing, and I'm really open to the fact that I could be the lost ball on this one. But when I think about what I know about Kentucky's work heretofore, I think about the document that is under the heading of Kentucky's competency education assessment. It's like KEAC. It's the competencies document that some pre-learning lab districts have been working on that include Kentucky's competencies. I have a visual on my desktop, but I don't know how to share my screen on Teams. Is that what you are talking about? Is your team talking about when they talk about Kentucky's Portrait of a Graduate?
Well, I think what we're talking about was that work that was conducted with the co-ops. I mean, when you include the word operationalized, then I know what you're saying. Okay. I know what you want us to do. That helped.
And I do think a look to perhaps bring into consideration some of the issues we heard today. Our graduates are perceived as being competent on the skills, but not competent on the soft skills. And so is that adequately reflected in that portrait of what it is we're trying to create? I mean, that portrait gives everybody guidance on what the outcome looks like, right? I mean, that's what I would imagine. I don't know that I'm familiar with this document. Thank you, Lou.
Sure. So Virginia has the Portrait of a Virginia Learner, other states at the state level, and this dovetails a lot with the work around the whole child movement to describe just what Sharon was talking about, and that is that we have some clarity around the knowledge through the academic standards that we want all children to attain over their time in P-12 education. But we also hear all the time, including a lot of conversation this morning around the skills, soft, essential, transcendent, 21st century, call them what you will, but those skills of creativity, communication, self-regulation, self-direction, problem solving. And then I would say there's also that component of the dispositional side of kiddos, and that's things like empathy and compassion and inclusion. So those knowledge, skills, and dispositions that describe that full child, the social, emotional, physical, and academic child, and then what that looks like in operation at the state policy level so that schools have both direction and cover when they move to include assessment of knowledge, skills, and dispositions at the district level. So my apologies to David Cook and team and others for fumbling over the competency-based education work we've been doing, but that link is, in my mind, what I thought you were talking about, but there may be something else I'm unaware of.
No, this is it. Yeah, and I put another link in under what you did, Lou, awesome. That goes, I think, even further. And so it takes us down to what this group called anchor competencies that some others have called survival skills or 21st century skills or soft skills. So there's all sorts of names for this, but it's the same list of stuff, and you just went through it. So I think, to be precise, what we'd want to talk about is are these anchor competencies in the goal, like because that was what was developed in 2018 and 2019. It's presented here in the link that you've got and that I put up. And if that's what you want us to start operationalizing, then that's probably what this goal should state. Because I think it's this term, portrait of a graduate, and the process of developing that, and then what do we do with it that's sort of throwing us off. Because it was a portrait of a graduate work that was conducted then that resulted in these anchor competencies.
And I think at the time, that's why we used verbs like rebuild and strengthen, in respect for the fact that the work had begun before we were constituted as a board, but at the same time, knowing that the journey is far from complete.
Well, yeah, and I think we're struggling with it in this conversation because this board wasn't here and I wasn't here. And a lot of the people that are on, on the meeting with us weren't part of that. So we're picking it up now, partway through and trying to then carry it forward. We're saying we're supportive of that work. It was the right thing. It was the right direction, the right work, and that we need to now pick it up and operationalize it is the term that you used that I think is appropriate. Like you want us to start bringing it to life in some tangible ways.
Exactly. And then modeling that for school districts. And we have a lot of school districts that are way out in front in this work. Shelby County was mentioned by the coalition team this morning. I could name several, Jefferson, Fleming, and others who have really said, we're going to put our performance assessment money where our mouths are and say these things matter in the big system. And we know that that ESEA has said to us, these local measures, these local evidences of knowledge, skills, and dispositions have value. So
If I might suggest, Lou, let us tinker on this one some and bring you back a revision. I mean, I think I get the concept of what everybody's driving toward, but I'd like for us to hammer on this with trying to get the wording right, and the I mean, there are sort of terms of art that we're introducing here, like they have a specific meaning in Kentucky's context, and so I want to make sure that this is framed right. But I think I understand what the board is driving toward and what you want, what you're asking the board to focus on, and what you're also asking me and the department to focus on. I just want the opportunity to sort of revise this in a thoughtful way.
No, absolutely, and I really appreciate that because language matters a lot in this work. So yes, absolutely. And just a reminder of Claire's comment to, as you have modeled with the coalition work, that this is about broader community besides education community. This is about all stakeholders with a heavy dollop of student voice in the process as well. So I think we have some good state level models for that, as well as some readiness inside Kentucky to keep that work moving forward. Thank you for that. The third bullet, promote anti-racism, justice, and equity, as documented in the Kentucky Board of Education's resolution, affirming its commitment to racial equity in Kentucky's public schools. I was elated by our presentations this morning, still recognizing that we are on an unfinished journey, but really loving the evidence that we're beginning to see that that the agency is responding well to the direction of this board in this regard. Any comments about this one in terms of keeping it on the list or refreshing the language?
Clearly, we're not finished and the work proceeds, and we should be, we want to feel confident that the work is, it's systemic work. It is, it's across the organization, and it's systemic horizontally and vertically, so that everybody who works in the department understands their relationship and the way they can contribute to getting that done.
Agreed. Thank you for that, Sharon. And it reminds me that if in fact we reach consensus to continue these goals moving forward, that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean we didn't get something done. It meant that we have entered into important, difficult goals and on a journey to do great things over time. So I'm digging it. Fourth one, prioritize student-centered education for every student in the state through thoughtful implementation of Senate Bill 158, an act related to the statewide education accountability system, as measured by policies established and the adoption of a new accountability system. Just as a reminder, again, pre-Commissioner Glass, this was a mandate under which we were working at the time around, and thanks to Rhonda and her team for getting us to where we are today, COVID notwithstanding. In some ways, perhaps we've checked this one off, the first half of this one, but we know that the coalition work is beginning to uncover new elements of a new accountability system that remain on the table. So perhaps we could reword this one with less of a nod to Senate Bill 158 implementation and more leave toward the coalition work. One possibility. Randy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that Commissioner Glass, stated that we have 3 phases, and so we completed phase 2, but we have not completed phase 3. So however he would like to word that, or you all wordsmithing to get so that we continue with stage 3, because I think lots of individuals are looking forward to stage 3, but deeper learning.
Very helpful, Randy, too. And thanks so much for reminding me that Jason has described those in 3 distinct phases of that work. Excellent. Other thoughts about student-centered? Yes, Jason.
Yeah, so as this is written, this one was, as you said, is largely been accomplished because the new accountability system that's envisioned with this goal was what was in 158. So the board and Rhonda and her team have run all the regulations. We put everything through. We need to get that done. I think now we're on the we're on the third track, the really long range track about imagining something that is transformative and not iterative, right? Because this refers to an iteration. Like we take the same tests and we're using the test data in some different ways with some different colors and some different rating systems. That is iterative. And so what you're really talking about is something transformative, and that links back to these anchor competencies that we were talking about. How do we measure those concepts as well? And it tracks back to what the discussion that we had earlier with the folks from the Center for Innovation and Education, that our stakeholders are telling us that what they value and the experiences they want for their kids are not reflected in the current accountability system, and that needs to somehow be part of this too. So I think this may be another one where we want to spend some time being thoughtful about what the right language is here. That we've largely accomplished what's written here, and now we need something that's sort of more aspirational.
Nice. Excellent. Your response was very helpful. And Randy's comments reminded me that there is some spillover here between the goals that we set for you as commissioner. And I believe we have some language in your goals that might be informative on that second one and the fourth one as well. So yeah, let's take a look at those two together. All right, I'm going to call on board members who've been unusually quiet this afternoon, but let's look at the fifth one before I do that. And it is, my toolbar is in my way, Merritt. Oh, there, no. Galvanize support of strong, developmentally appropriate early childhood education as measured by taking steps toward universal public preschool and fully funded full-day kindergarten. Maybe some language changes here. I'm going to turn it over to Patrice to think out loud about that with us as well. Galvanizing support of strong developmentally appropriate early childhood education, I think, is a really strong statement. We are definitely making steps in the right direction. Patrice, how does this one strike you in terms of the wording of the goal?
I still overall like it. I'm not sure if we should not put full day kindergarten in first, because I feel like we have more of a possibility of reaching that goal first. Mm-hmm. That makes sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think flip-flopping those based on the conversation that we just had, but we've got a couple things going on here. We are standing strongly in support of early childhood education, coupled with the funding that it's going to take to do that well. I think that comes out pretty powerfully in the statement.
If I might, Lou, the thing I would add is we have now fully funded kindergarten. What we need is a legislative commitment to the ongoing funding of full day kindergarten. So I think that language, and then you still can leave in the toward universal preschool. So a little reordering, but the main most of this goal I think can remain the same, with the exception of that it's the ongoing funding that we're really going for on the kindergarten element.
Maintaining that funding, yes.
Excellent. And Meredith, one of the things you and I can do before the October meeting, or a special call meeting if we have one in between, we could look at each of these and put some sub-bullets in there of just what we just talked about, things that have actually happened toward attaining these goals, as a way of taking stock about the progress that we've made as a Commonwealth and as a team over the course of this past year as well. And we heard a lot of that worthy of celebration this morning, but we want to capture it. All right, so some quiet and tired board members this afternoon. As you think about that list,
Lou,
yes, Jason.
At the risk of opening a whole can of worms here, I think there is a term that we've got to talk about out in the open and head on. And so if we could bring the list back up again.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. So on the third bullet, the one around anti-racism, justice, and equity, the term anti-racism, I just looked it up in the Oxford Dictionary, and it's something that I think we all would stand behind: the policy or practice of opposing racism and promoting racial tolerance. So who in the world would, well, there are some people in the world who would be opposed to that, but there are none of us here, and no educator in their heart should. So I can certainly stand behind the term, but I think it's important to point out that in this ridiculous hyper-focus and hyperventilation and histrionics around critical race theory, this is a trigger term because it is associated with critical race theory, and it is sometimes co-opted by white supremacist groups as a code for an effort to sort of limit the power and all sorts of racially targeted efforts toward white people. So I just want to raise that up and make sure that the board has an understanding of what we mean by that when we include it, and that it is something that we want to continue with. And again, I know that maybe it's not something we want to raise at 4:40 in the afternoon after all the disruption that we've had today, but I just wanted to point out that this is a trigger term when it comes to that whole conversation that the state and nation has been wrapped up in when it comes to does critical race theory exist in our schools? What is it, and do we need to stamp it out somehow?
Excellent. No, I'm really, really pleased and proud of you for bringing it up. Interesting. When I read that, I thought, oh, it doesn't say promote critical race theory. In fact, It does say what we talked about last July, which is that we want, what was the Webster's Dictionary definition? We want to stand against racism and promote
racial tolerance.
Racial tolerance.
Oppose racism and promote racial tolerance.
So, number one, I like the fact that we have a positive verb there around promote. But if anti-racism, in fact, is a red herring for us, that's just going to distract us from the work. So I am not tied to the word, but I also want us to be true to the convictions that we feel in terms of recognizing that racism, of course, does exist. On lots and lots of different levels, institutional to individual, and that we want to commit to racial equity in our schools. I appreciate Thomas's clarity and evolution around the thinking about a broad notion of equity. So as long as we don't shy away, like Mr. Johnson said this morning, as long as we don't shy away from the fact that racial equity is an extremely important pillar in this conversation, to broaden the term does appeal to me as well. But board members, please pipe up and pipe in on this question about the language around goal number 3.
Commissioner Glasswood, you looked it up in the Oxford Dictionary.
Or Google did for me, so.
It doesn't appear to me to be anything involved in the critical race theory. I think it says what it says well, and I don't see how it could offend one group or the other group. But then again, I may be looking at it from a different perspective. But
I'm have to say this every time I go down this rabbit hole of talking about critical race theory, to say first, I'm not an expert on critical race theory. I don't use critical race theory on a daily basis. So I don't know how many times I've been called either by the legislature or by news broadcasts or whatever to express an opinion on something that I'm not really well versed in. But I'll do my best, Mr. Johnson, to try and get into this term and where I think it's a trigger point. if the term anti-racism involves opposing racism on a number of levels, and that can mean within oneself, so recognizing that we all have biases and they've come from lived experiences, and we need to be aware of those and recognize them within ourselves and act against that to create a racially free internal space where we think there is racism can exist between people. We need to be aware of that. Racism can exist within institutions, either through de facto or policies that are put in place that are explicitly right or implicitly racist. So it can exist within institutions, and it can exist within systemically. So that there are power decisions, access to resources decisions that have racial currents in them, or they have racial outcomes associated with them. So anti-racism, I think, would imply that all of that, you have to be sort of working all of those points, recognizing that they're all present, and you have to be thinking about all of them to be anti-racist. So that Venn diagram does cross over with the whole academic and legal concept of critical race theory, which is I would define as an exploration of why does racism still exist if it has been outlawed in federal and state law. So we know racism still exists, and it exists inside people, between people, in institutions, and in larger contexts. So there you go. From a lay person that has done some reading on this to try and understand where this debate is coming from, that's my thoughts on why there's an intersection here, or why it's a triggering term, because there is some overlap. You might consider just using the term promote equity, because I think that if you go back to Thomas's presentation from this morning, that does encapsulate what I think we're going for, and without sort of the triggering term that activates really not a very productive debate about it. So I'd put that out there as something to think about.
I just worded it in the chat, Jason. This is a possibility. What if this goal were to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in affirming KBE's resolution, in keeping with the KBE resolution affirming its commitment to racial equity in Kentucky's public schools? Claire and Allison were vibing along the same lines. What I don't want to do is shy away from any conversation about race, and I do want the resolution to stand in this. Sharon, I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you.
Well, I want to say, I felt like the anti-racism term was recognizing the urgency or the need to help students create the space where students feel safe to learn. They are where we are going to create a community that is inclusive and nurturing, some of the terms that you use, Lou, but also where truth is spoken. And so, because it's like equity, justice, inclusion without truth is not the community I want students to be, in which I want students educated. So I just, I'm trying to understand how we can communicate that we want all of our students to feel that they are in a safe, nurturing, learning environment in which they expect to experience equity, justice, respect, inclusion as essential outcomes, as essential dynamics and features of the experience that they have in our schools. That's the only way to get to actualize our commitment to racial equity. And if we're not getting there with everybody, we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't achieved this goal. So, I'm not one for waving a red cape in front of the bulls that are out there in this arena. I'm not one for that. I don't think that's smart politics, and it's sure not smart as a change agent unless there is a reason to do it. So I'm not going to argue against dropping the term anti-racism, but I believe I was trying to recognize that we've got students in our schools who do not feel included. They do not feel safe. They're not going to take risks. They are, in order to learn, they are going to not feel embraced. And so, how you going to get all of, I thought that was a nice shorthand version, way to capture that sentiment.
I agree. I think without the truth, all of those phrases are very empty. So just saying diversity, equity, and inclusion over and over again does not make a child feel safe or have a sense of belonging or being welcomed in her environment. And remember, when we drafted that resolution, it was very shortly after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So we were really empathizing with the experiences of our kiddos who were about to return to school in the middle of the pandemic, et cetera. So yeah, I think we've got to, I think just that Jason's admonition is well advised. We have to really, like you said, no reason to wave the red cape. We don't want to do that because that becomes a distraction. And we also don't want people who don't understand where we're coming from to be lost in the process either. We want to hear and listen, but at the same time, our goal is to take care of those kids. Patrice added, Allison was giving you some amens over in the chat. Sharon, Patrice added, I love including that each child has a sense of belonging. I think this is one that we can work on. Let's work on it without sanitizing feelings that Sharon just described, though. Jacqueline, please.
I have no idea how to take my hand down now, so I'll work on that. There it goes. So just from I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think if we revisit our conversation this morning and remember that our goal is to create student-centered learning opportunities and school systems and not adult-centered ones, then we certainly should be centering this on the truth and reality of our students rather than the mistruths and, the way that some of these things have been intentionally misconstrued for political gain. And I'll say that I think I might be the only elected official on this call, so I can say that. But this is about truth, and we owe it to be true to our students. And if that means that we need to clarify versus sanitizing, I think is the word that Lou said, then I think that is a direction that we could probably all support. And maybe this is a space in which we, in clarifying this goal and the purpose behind our goals, will help these kids across Kentucky, but also the adults that are struggling with this conversation.
Right. Yeah, agreed. I want to look back at some of Thomas's slides from this morning too, because I know he has really worked hard to clarify his own thinking and the language that we use. So I do think this is one that with some serious, thoughtful language work, we can probably also get into better shape. Patrice.
I still want us to consider what Sharon said. Just struck such a chord in my heart about that sense of belonging for our students. That just it physically hurt as I listened to her talk about that. And I think it would be most appropriate for us to add that phrase somewhere along in that, whether we change anything or not otherwise.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much. And as we capture these ideas in this recording, that will help when Meredith and I go back to work on these. Claire and then Sharon.
I was sort of going in the same direction Patrice just went, but I also like Sharon's language about creating that environment that that really values that sense of inclusion and, you know, that sense of belonging too. So I think, you know, if we go back to the idea of creating an environment that is that child-centered one that has that focus on the diversity and inclusion.
I do. I think we haven't, I think actually using the word safe would be important here because I'm a believer that we keep schools safe from the inside out. And so really including safety as a value in our goals, I think would be important as well. Sharon.
So I'm thinking back on when Alvis brought up this morning the issue of how the system is really not serving kids based on race. Okay, we've got the Shaker Heights studies where solid middle-class Black kids were not doing as well as their white counterparts, and they take vacations, they are exposed to travel, they have books in their homes, their parents are accomplished. But when these kids get in school, something happens that makes them the other. Okay, we go back to our own experiences with desegregation. When the kids get off the bus, the Black kids go into, you know, count them, the number of Black kids that are in an AP and dual credit courses and stuff like that. We have to make an affirmative effort to try and equalize participation in what is viewed to be privileged or more desirable. Okay, we don't make any effort at all when it comes to free and reduced lunch, because that separate. See, we got to realize something is happening associated with race, and what I don't want us to do. Jason, I am serious. I am not advocating getting in the ring with a bull and getting killed on this. What I am advocating, though, is that came to mind this morning, the work that Thomas is doing can make us have to have conversations about differences that are happening. Just because we're used to seeing them happen, we take it as normal and don't do anything about it because it's always happened this way. We cannot have the workforce our country needs if we persist in that behavior. We will not have peace in our communities if we don't make sure that these students feel included as valued citizens. So I'm not trying to avoid race. I'm not trying to jam it down our throats. But we've got to proceed with the brave, the courageous understanding that race matters here in some ways that we may not fully understand, may not be able to fully articulate, and may not even be able to solve. But if we remove it from our thinking as something that is not important, I think we make a mistake.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm trying to hearken on a phrase that the CIE team used around identity and really helping students understand their own identity as a member of a school community and the impact that has, whatever that identity might entail, but really thinking about inclusivity in a broad sense, but not shying away from more difficult conversations about race. Randy, then Claire.
Yeah, I think we said it this morning, or some of my thinking here that we said this morning. I liked what Dr. Tucker's presentation was this morning. I thought he was specifically on target with it's about social mobility. It deals with race. It deals with black and white issues. It deals multicultural across the board. And as I said this morning, we need to continue to be bold, and we need to stand firm in our standing for all of our children across the board. But I do agree with Commissioner Glass that from the work with Dr. Tucker's work, I think we let them go back and look at this goal, and let's shape it in the format of where we are. We're not going to back down. Everybody on this board and every teacher out there in the Commonwealth of Kentucky and all the staff out there are for every children, and we're not going to stand and allow racism to take place. But what we do need to do is talk about that conversation. What is noise out there? And let's get on to educating our children in the appropriate ways and let the noise be the noise. But let's move forward and make sure that if we hire Dr. Tucker to be our equity person, let them go at this and clarify it. Don't water it down. Don't do anything but clarify it so that, we can get rid of the noise.
Excellent. Thank you. Claire.
I really do feel that we need to keep reference to race in this because it has been too systemic, and and so much is not apparent to so many of our Kentucky citizens. And I certainly don't feel that we need to avoid the reference to racism. So in my mind, it has to stay in this because we have to stay strong in what we believe.
I agree. And racial equity is one of those terms that as we continue to communicate and continue to clarify, it has its own laudable meaning as we move forward. Really helpful. Meredith, if you would put the 5 goals back up. In the interest of time, let me clarify where I think we are. And then I'm happy, excuse me, yes, Mr. Johnson, yes, please.
I had my hand up about an hour.
And now I see you waving it in the conference room. My apologies.
I just want to go back and say, the argument over teaching the critical race theory is an argument that we should exclude part of the history of our country. That's that argument. But this goal, I think the reason we wrote it the way we did was because at the time, I don't think we need to put a lot of that other stuff in this particular goal. Students feeling safe and all that. But this just highlights specifically that we want to focus on the promoting anti-racism in our schools. And I don't see that as a red herring to those other groups that may be offended by it. To me, if you want to teach history, let's teach the whole history of the country. Let's don't exclude it because it offends some people. And I don't think we ought to, and maybe there's a better way to say this, but at the time we wanted to focus on promoting anti-racism in our schools. And that's really all this particular goal is about. I don't see it as being inclusive of a lot of other things that will fall into some of our other goals. But this one specifically, let's highlight what it is. Let's work toward getting rid of it. Now, there might be a better way to say it, but I think what we want is for this to come through in the way we stated it. Now you can say it in a different way. I got no problem with that, but I don't think we ought to tangle this goal up with a bunch of other goals. I think it says what it says. It says it specifically, And some people might be offended by it, but it sounds like to me it's a good thing that we're saying that in Kentucky, we want to promote anti-racism. We don't want to discriminate against the Jews. We don't want to discriminate against white people. We don't want to discriminate against black people. We don't want to discriminate against Chinese people. That's all it says to me. Now, you may look at it totally different.
No, very helpful. And I do think that you remind us of the conversation we had in July of last year, of 2020. And I think that's really important. And I hear that sentiment really strongly. And I think it's helpful and worthy in this conversation. So let me recap where I think we are. On the first goal, advancing policies, I think we agreed that we want to keep that one pretty much as it is, but begin gathering some evidence underneath about how we are making progress toward that goal. On the second and fourth one, I heard some rewording to get to what we really are after there, some clarity around what that goal really means to us as a board, each of those two goals. The last one, maybe flip-flopping full day kindergarten and universal preschool on that, but coming out again in strong support for our earliest learners. And I would categorize what I just heard, and I will listen to the recording again, and Meredith and I will work on bringing this language back in October at a special call meeting. But on this one, I heard, let's not lose the sentiment that we all shared when we developed this goal, but at the same time, look for, I think I heard more student-centered language in the goal itself. And I think Jacqueline's comment about thinking back to this morning about not adult-centered, but student-centered, and what that looks like in a place that is racially safe and safe for all kids. Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you've summarized well the changes to these. I would just like to, for the record and for the board, say that I think that the statements that are in goals are really important, and that you should really be thoughtful about what you say in them so that they mean something to you. And so that is the reason that I raised up this question around this term anti-racism. Let's get into what we think it means. And if it's what we stand behind, then let's stand behind it. I don't put it forth because I think we should sanitize the board's goals or try to kowtow to this ridiculous, phony, politically fueled debate about critical race theory. But I do think it's important that this board understand what it's putting in its goals and what that means to us, and that we be on the record saying what it means to us, and that we stand behind it.
Excellent. Thank you. No, and please don't ever shy away from provocative questions. That's one of the main roles we hope you will play as you lead our team forward. And Allison, God love her heart, can't figure out how to raise her hand, so she texts and does it really well. Ms. Sloan.
I had a hand to raise earlier, but when I got kicked out of the group, it didn't give me my hand back. So I don't know what happened there. I kind of want to add on to what Commissioner Glass was saying. I kind of look at us as a board as part of our task is to look at data. Our job is to see what's going on in our schools. Our job is to recognize when there's a problem of practice or there's something that needs addressed to fix. And we all know that there is data out there that shows that our Black and brown students have some issues in our schools with equity, and they're not being addressed in the same way as other students are. We know that they're being suspended and expelled at higher rates. We know that their grades are not up to where everyone else's is. And I also think that as a state board, part of our job is to model, as we did today with choices we made, for our local boards. And our local boards are struggling right now with some of these issues and how to address them and making the right decisions. So I think if we shy away from things to try to make things easier and to address issues that are not easy, then we're not showing them how to go about making those decisions as well. And I think that it's very important that we look at data and we say, these are things we have to address because it's about the students. It's not about us. And that goes back to what Jacqueline said and what we said earlier today. It shouldn't be about the adults first. It should be about what do we need to do for students, and then what do the adults need to be able to make that happen. So I think we have to address this head on and not worry about what other people think that we know are not accurate, because we're the ones with the data. And when you ask a lot of people what they think the CRT is, they can't tell you. They don't know. So we do have data, and we do have the things that we know are actually happening in our schools or not happening that should be happening. So I'm fine, and I think everyone else here is probably agree that we hit this head on and do what we need to do as a board so that other people see that we do that and follow in suit and address it at the local level as well.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to Jacqueline for the comment over in the chat too. Yeah, Jason, I've been fangirling about all of the local, state, and national attention and guidance you've been giving us around these really important conversations. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for engaging in this after a really long, tumultuous day, working on only our 5 lofty goals as a state board team. It does beg the question, what might be missing? We're not going to go there today. You have some time to let these marinate, mull over these ideas. Meredith and I will be happy to go back. Notice how I use the Queen's we there, Meredith. We'll go back and work on some language with this, run it by Jason and the team, engage Thomas in the conversation as well, and then have that cleaned up for you for the next time that we meet, special or regular, so we can bring back some updated versions of this work. In the meantime, if you do say, hey man, we're not hitting a big goal that I had when I came onto this board, or if even in tomorrow's meeting, if more ideas bubble up and we need to think about a 6th goal or some augmentation of these goals, we can do that as well. So this is, as always, I believe in good goal setting work. This is work in progress that we will all engage in as we flow into the next version of this important set of goals. Phew-wee, what a day. Don't let anybody say that your State Board of Education is inflexible and can't pivot. We've got this. I can't find my agenda, but we had a day. Thanks to everyone. My apologies, agency team members who were not able to present today. Thanks for understanding. Your reports are important to us. They are urgent to us, and we will ensure that we get to hear from you as soon as possible. We'll get that information to you as soon as we have some rescheduled time to do that. Todd is so sad that he was not able to give his board member ethics overview today, but you do have a set of riveting slides in your portal if you'd like to have some advance look at that training, but we will bring Todd G. Allen in for that as soon as possible as well. However, I know you are exhausted. Thank you for a productive meeting. Thank you, as always, for being fully present and engaged in this work. You are amazing. At this time, I need a motion to adjourn this retreat meeting. Do I have such a motion? Oh, yes, Mr. Johnson, I see you. We have a motion from Alvis. Do we have a second?
A second.
And a second from Joanne. Todd says we can have a voice vote since we are, no, probably have to have a darn one since we are now totally remote. So Allison, would you please call the roll?
Oh.
Joanne.
Allison, where'd that come from?
That's okay. I knew what you meant.
No, Meredith.
Joanne Adams.
I vote yes.
Claire Batt.
Claire Batt votes yes.
Holly Bloodworth.
Holly Bloodworth votes yes.
Alvis Johnson.
Votes yes.
Patrice McCrary.
I vote yes.
Brandy Poe.
I vote yes.
Sharon Robinson.
I vote yes.
Lou Young.
I vote yes. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you virtually in the morning. You do have a Teams invitation in your calendar invite for tomorrow. We'll start promptly at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Thanks for everything today. Safe travels for those of you who are heading home.